Hey, once again, good morning, guys. So, today we will start with your second module. So, the last module covered the first three chapters of your textbook. Okay, so it's a very vast module. However, module two uh, is relatively shorter. It's just one chapter, chapter number four in your textbook. Okay, so we are moving on to part two of your textbook, which is hardware technologies. In that, in this particular module, we will only see your processors and memory hierarchy. Okay, so we will start with processors. Okay, so mainly we will see advanced processor technology, and then we will see superscalar and vector processors and memory hierarchy technology. Okay, so probably we'll try to cover as much as possible in advanced processor technology in today's session. Oh yeah, so in memory hierarchy you also have virtual memory technology. So we've already learned a few properties of the processors, like what are the different attributes and how are we going to measure uh, uh, the performance. So one thing we learned is your clock rate, correct? And there is also something called a CPI. CPI is clocks per instruction. So in general, what do we desire? Do we need higher clock rate or lower clock rate? So generally we go for higher clock rate, right? So higher clock rate is preferred. Why? Because you can get more ticks in a given span, right? So that's why we see we used to at least see higher clock frequencies of over every generation, correct? Like 2.4 gigahertz, and then we have so something 2.4 gigahertz is always better than a 1 gigahertz, right? So that's the clock rate. And then the other thing is CPI, clocks per instruction, and this has to be lower. Okay, number of clocks I will take to finish one instruction on an average. Okay, so CPI should be lesser. Okay, so now as we see, right, like, in the early 90s, the race in the clock frequency started. I mean, late 80s, and then mainly in the 90s we used to have like a greater race, like especially the Intel and AMD and even IBM, all these desktop processors. So what they tried to do was they marketed solely based on clock rates. Okay, so we used to have like 100 megahertz system, and then the next 6 months we used to have like a 250 megahertz, and then 500 megahertz. So it used to like keep doubling, or it actually increased. Okay, but beyond certain stage, right, like especially in the later part of the 2000s and this decade, so we are not seeing that much. Okay, so for the past 10-15 years we've seen only 2.4 gigahertz, maximum up to 3 gigahertz. So we haven't seen much improvement in clock rates, and CPI rate is lowered. So, but this is what is more important: how many clocks you take per instruction. Okay, but none of these two will exactly tell you this processor is the best. Again, why? Because it really depends on what benchmark or what program you are running. Okay, there are so many factors involved. That's what we studied in most part of your module one. So if we want to broadly categorize the processors based on these two, right, the clock rate and CPI, so we can say we can categorize them as CISC or RISC. Okay, CISC stands for complex instruction set computers, and RISC stands for reduced instruction set computers. Okay, so this is how the plot between your clock speed and CPI is going to look like. Okay, so the higher the clock speed, right, like the clock rate, we somehow we reduce its higher performance. And then the lower the clock speed, it's going to save some power. Okay, it's like low power systems. Like if you take like your uh, watch or any other embedded system, right, so that clock frequency will, you cannot expect it to be at 2.4 gigahertz, correct? It will be much smaller. It will be very, very low. Okay, so So that's what you have. So this is the plot. So here this area gives the area for CISC. Okay, so CISC occupies this. So it has a higher clock CPIs, higher CPIs, and it also so the range clock range will be roughly the same for both RISC and CISC. Uh, but then RISC processors tend to have a lower CPI. Okay, so there's a small category here called vector processors, which again we'll see. We've already seen that a glimpse of that in your first module. Okay, vector processors are part of your RISC. Okay, so typical examples for your CISC process include your x86 architecture. And primarily in today's market, we have only Intel and AMD, and most of the market share is with Intel. And in RISC, we have several processors. We have MIPS, we have Spark, and then we have RISC-V architecture, and most importantly, ARM. So ARM is the one that is actually dominating the RISC architecture. It's not purely RISC again. So as we will see. So, but anyway, so that's what we have. Okay. So these are the key players in your RISC architecture. So in the design space, right? So we have your CISC computers. So CISC is dedicated, like it's like a different category altogether. So which we saw. However, in the RISC, so there are a lot of other possibilities. Okay, so you have superscalar processors in RISC. So actually, superscalars are also possible in CISC, but then we're focusing primarily on the RISC architecture now. So you can have superscalar processors. You can also have VLIW. So VLIW is nothing but very long instruction words, and we have vector computers, vector supercomputers. Okay, so these are the different categories which come under RISC. Why we are focusing only on RISC here is because it's simpler to put these things in under RISC. However, superscalar alone, so we have even the Intel processors have superscalar architecture. Okay, so we will see all these things, what these terms mean. Okay, so that will be covered as part of the the rest of the class. Okay, just look at this GIF image. Okay, and then this is an example for pipeline. Okay, something called as a pipeline. This is an assembly line for some gadget. It could be like some AC or something, I don't know what is it, but anyway, so just look at this image. Okay, and I just want you to focus on any one robotic arm, and then tell me like how many tasks each robotic arm does. Okay, I need some volunteers for this. Okay, so we'll pick somebody. Shubham, can you point to someone? Vaibhav. Hey, pick any one robotic arm and then tell me like how many different tasks it is doing. This one? Okay. Okay, it's doing one task. Okay. All right. Just point to someone else. Chaitra. Hey, yeah. So pick another arm. Okay. So pick another robotic arm and then tell me how many different tasks it is doing. Bottom left. Okay. This one. Closing the top. How many different jobs is that? Two. What two? Okay, okay, okay. We'll just call it one. Okay, so it's just doing one task, right? It's just picking the top and putting it on. Okay, fine. Right. So we can just call this like covering the top lid. Right. So it's just that's why I said it's one task. Okay. So now what we are trying to see here. Thanks, Chaitra, and thanks, Vaibhav. So if you see any robotic arm, it's doing exactly one job. Okay, so even if you pick something else, right, it's just fixing the screws, something, it's just fixing the screws, that's all it does is fixing that screw. So it's job is limited to that. But if you see the big picture, you see the entire whatever gadget this is, right? It's getting assembled in a parallel way. Okay, so there are so many jobs that needs to be done. So you need to close the lid, you have to put some PCB on that, and then enclose that, put the screws on, and then another finish the encasing, and then it has to be delivered. But if you see, every instant of time, one of your gadget is getting ready every second, right? Or every unit of time, one uh, 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 gadget is getting ready. Okay, so it's even though there are so many tasks here, it's getting so in any one instance you will get uh, one gadget ready here. You understood? So this is the concept of pipelining. Okay, so even though you have multiple tasks to perform at, so what you have done is you've just divided the tasks into several subtasks. Okay, so you just divided it into several subtasks that can be independently performed, but at the same time there is some kind of a sequence to it. You cannot actually parallelly put everything together, right? Like for example, you cannot have the top lid and the nails or the screws, right, at the same time. So there is some kind of a flow here, but at the same time each one can be done by a different person. Okay, so this is the concept of uh, the pipelining. The same thing is what we are doing in processors now. Okay, so instead of you doing all the tasks at one time, what you will do is one person is just going to fetch an instruction for you. Okay, and after this guy fetches the instruction, he will pass it on to the next guy who will do the decoding. Okay, decoding means you will understand what is that instruction. Okay, fetching guy will just fetch it. He'll just pick the instruction from the memory and say, hey, this is the next instruction, handle it. He'll throw it to the next guy. The next guy will go read it. Oh, this is an add instruction. Okay, so which means I need to use an adder. So that's all. He will understand that, and he will say, hey adder, wake up. And this guy is just going to do the addition. He does not care where the instruction is from and what you need to do. Nothing. So when you give him two numbers, he will just add and give it to the other guy. That's all. And finally the other guy is going to get the result and put it back into the memory. Okay, so all the other guy does, he doesn't care. The last guy doesn't care whether it's an add instruction or a subtract instruction, multiply instruction. He doesn't care all that. All his job is to get the data, put it back in memory. Okay, so now once you do all these things, right, so every clock cycle you will get one instruction get completed. Okay, so otherwise all these things would have taken so much time. Okay, so let us say all these things should have been done by one processor without this break. It means that this guy is going, one single guy is going to do this step one, the same guy will do step two, same guy will do step three. Okay, and then finally he is going to take like four steps, okay, to complete one job. Rather than waiting for four steps, what you have done is you've just divided into four subtasks. You've assigned four different guys, and then each guy will do a job. So now you have reduced it by one fourth. Okay, so every one fourth of the time that you used to spend, you will get one output. Okay, so that is how you enhance performance. Okay, so it's a very important concept. So what you have done is you've divided the entire instruction into different phases. Like I said, fetch, decode, execute, and all these things, right? So we will just understand some terminologies in this pipeline. So this is called as pipeline. Okay, so this line, right? So you're just doing a pipeline here. It's just, why is it called a pipeline? It's because you take a pipe and then you pour some water, right? The first part of the water comes out after some time. Okay, but right after that you get a continuous flow of water. Okay, it's not like you get only in bursts. So similarly you also have, it's some kind of like a flow of water here, right, like a fluid here. So that's your pipeline. And pipeline cycle is nothing but how much time uh, the guy who's the slowest, right, so that guy takes. So all these things, so each guy, so this guy could do the screwing faster maybe. Okay, but this guy may take some time. So now when you have to calculate the clock cycle, how much time you need to give for each guy, it's going to be the worst among all these guys. The slowest guy will take, say, some 10 nanoseconds or something. Then everybody gets 10 nanoseconds. Even though others can do it in 8 nanoseconds, you will give 10 nanoseconds. So that's your pipeline cycle. Okay. So instruction pipeline cycle. So you're going to have uh, for given instruction. So when you divide that into different phases, what's the cycle time for that? Then you have the issue latency. Issue latency is nothing but how much time you take to issue instructions one after the other. In this particular case, it is one per cycle, correct? So every cycle or every unit of time you can issue. So this guy is issuing one gadget at a time, correct? So similarly, you for instructions also you will have that latency. Then it's a rate. So rate is nothing but it's the same. Latency is the measure of time, and rate is nothing but how much per unit of time, right? Or per clock cycle, how much can you issue? So ideally it will be 1, correct? But then we also saw something called superscalar, correct? For a scalar processor, ideally the issue rate will be 1 because you will be issuing one instruction in every clock cycle. But in a superscalar processor, it could be more than 1. Okay, we will see what is that in a bit, but then that's why it's called superscalar, right? You can have more than one issue in a clock cycle. And simple operation latency is the latency. If you think about it, the first time when this started, right? So all these guys will be idle, correct? So this guy will start first, and then the first gadget will come to this guy, second guy, and the first gadget will come to third guy. So all these while these guys will be idle. So now if there are say like 5 stages here, then till fifth stage is complete, you will not have the gadget out. Okay, so so that is your latency. After 5 clock cycles, you will have the first gadget out, and after that you will start getting the output one per cycle. Okay, it's similar to when you have like a long pipe and you pour in water. The time it actually takes for water to traverse the entire pipe, the initial state, right? That is your latency. But once the water comes out, then you will have a continuous flow, correct? So that will be your throughput. Okay, but what is latency? It depends on the length of your pipe, correct? Similarly here, it depends on the number of stages you have in your pipe. Then obviously you'll have some resource conflicts. So we saw about dependencies and all, right? So let us say, so here these are all independent, but we saw in our instructions this is not the case, correct? So this could be like an add instruction, and that add instruction could be waiting for some other person. Okay, so until then you cannot do. So then you'll have to make this guy wait. So you'll have to put this guy to wait and then finish the other guy. So because of all these there will be some conflict, and because of that again you may not have the continuous throughput. Okay, and we are going to compare it against a base scalar processor. A base scalar processor is something that does not have a pipeline, but it's all similarly it has that. Okay, so what it takes for a normal a scalar processor without this pipeline. So that is what we are going to compare our pipelined processor against. Okay, any questions so far? So you need to understand this very clearly. Okay, it's a fundamental concept. Any questions, guys? Okay. So if not, so let's move on. So this is how a pipeline processor is going to look like. It looks like steps, right? Staircase or something. So actually what is happening is the x-axis is nothing but your time. Okay, time in cycles. So each one is one clock cycle. Okay. So now this is going to be your different stages. Okay. This is your instruction 1. Okay, so this is your first instruction, and this is your second instruction, and so on. Okay, so these are the instructions. The first instruction is going to come in. Okay, and then typically it is called as so it's divided as fetch, decode, execute, and write back. Okay, so fetching is again you will fetch the instruction, and once you fetch the instruction, correct, what you will do, you will give in the second clock cycle, you will give it to the decoder. Okay, now if you think about it, now this guy, right, so here the decoder is working, but the fetch guy, right, the fetch guy is free. So what he can do, he can actually fetch the next instruction. Okay, so he will again do the fetch. Now in this case, so this guy will be executing, he'll throw it to execute, and this guy will, so this guy will be uh, passing it on to the decode, and fetch guy will again be free, so he will start fetching, and here the decoder guy would have been free, so he'll decode. Okay, so if you see, it's going to repeat. Okay, so it's going to be fetch, decode, execute, write back, fetch, decode, execute, write back. So this, it's just going to happen similar to what the GIF image we saw earlier, right? So this is what your pipeline is all about. Okay, so as you can see, until the end of fourth clock cycle, you will not have any output, and this is your latency. Okay, till this time, till the end of fourth cycle, you will not have any output. But after that, when you see from fourth clock cycle, end of fourth clock cycle, you will have one instruction completed. Here your second instruction is complete, here your third instruction is complete. So every successive cycle, you will have one instruction that is getting completed. Okay, so this is your throughput. Here in this case, it's the ideal scenario where you don't have any dependency or any conflict. You can have one instruction that is getting completed in every clock cycle after your latency time. Okay, any questions on this? Is it clear, guys? Hello. Okay. So here's a scenario where you are under pipelining. Okay. What is under pipelining? It's like an inefficient way of pipelining. In this case, what is happening is you have your fetch and decode. Okay. But the fetch and decode is done by the same person. Okay. And here execute and write back is again done by the same person. So if that is the case, then you are actually wasting one clock cycle here. Okay, so that's what is happening. Okay, so here you will not have, in every clock cycle you may not have an output, but every alternate cycles you will have. Why? Because the same guy is doing execute and write back. Okay, so this is one case of under pipelining. The other case of under pipelining is when you have like, it's again, it's a similar situation. Here what is happening is, here you just have it in one stage itself. Okay, you are not, you instead of having like four different stages like you had earlier, you have only two different stages. Here the problem will be your clock time, right? See how much, so so you can actually have a clock of this length. Okay, but rather you're just wasting one clock cycle here. Okay, every clock you're just wasting it here. Okay, so instead of this, you can actually divide it into different stages. Okay, so the takeaway from this is that, so you need to have as many number of stages, both from the instruction side as well as the resource side, for you to schedule the pipeline. Okay, otherwise your pipeline will be under pipeline. Okay, it will be not efficient. Okay, so you're just losing 50% efficiency here. Okay, all right. So this is the data path for a given uh, processor. Okay, so this is how your microprocessor is going to look like. I'm sure like you would have had you've studied microprocessors in your earlier semesters. So to give a recap, right, so what you have is, so you have your memory. Okay, so through the external bus you actually access the memory. There are two channels, one is for the address and another for data. So your, what will your PC do? So the PC is your program counter. It's just going to say, hey, my next instruction is in this address. It's going to give that address, and from that you will fetch the address. I mean, you will fetch the data from corresponding to that address, and that is your instruction, and you will bring it back and put it in your instruction register. Okay, and once you have this in your instruction register, you are going to call the control unit. Control unit is going to decode it. So there's going to be a decoding logic. The decoder is going to say, okay, this is some instruction. It's a load instruction, or probably it's an add instruction. Let's take add instruction for example. If it's an add instruction, control signal, it will change the controls appropriately so that the adder gets activated, and then the corresponding data is available. Okay, so you'll get the corresponding data here. You will do the addition, and then you will store the result back. If needed, you will access all the registers that are involved here. Okay, so this is the basic control flow. So once you do this, again your PC is going to point to the next. Okay, PC will always, so control unit is going to take care of that also. Once your PC gives the address and the instruction is fetched, PC is now going to become PC plus 4. Okay, or PC will point to the next instruction. So this keeps happening. That's all. It's just like it's a fast interpreter. Okay, it's just going to read line by line of your program and then going to execute. That's all it does. So that's your processor. Okay, in a nutshell. So this brings us again to your CISC versus RISC, right? So pretty much this is your takeaway for today's class. We are going to learn about CISC and RISC. So CISC, as we mentioned, it's complex instruction set computers, and RISC is reduced instructions set computer. Okay, so what it means is that your CISC processor, the example of which includes your Intel, AMD, and all x86 based processors, they have complex instruction set, as the name suggests. What do you mean by complex? It's like it has uh, it supports lots of different types of instructions. For example, you can have, let us say, if you take an add instruction, right? So add is a very simple instruction, correct? You just take two registers, say R1 and R2. You sum R1 R2 and then you store it in R3 maybe. Okay. So this is a very simple add instruction, but this is available only in a. So there is only one of this that is available in your RISC processor. Okay. So this is what we have learned. Okay, so you have your add instruction R3 equals to, I mean, R1 plus R2, correct? However, in a CISC processor, you will have like 10 variants of add. Okay, so it could be something, so this could be one variant, the other one could be something like this. You will store it in memory. Okay, but you will add register R1 and R2. Okay, so this is a memory location. You take two registers, you add it, put it in a memory location. Or you could do something like this. You could add, oh sorry, M2, M3. You could add two memory locations and put it into another memory location without involving registers, and any other combination, right? So depending on what the architecture is, you will have different kind of support just for this add instruction. Okay, you could even have like other examples, like you can actually have multiple different types of instructions. Okay, you can call a complex instruction. You can actually have like a multiply and accumulate. Okay, so this multiply and accumulate could be one instruction, and then this instruction again will have different addressing modes. Okay, so because of this complexity, what happens is the hardware becomes much more complex. Okay, because it has to support so many variants of even a single instruction. Okay, so that is your complex instruction set computer. Now to handle such complexity, how will you do, your control unit will become complex, correct? Your control unit is the one who's the brain. It's the brain of your processor now. Okay, what it is going to tell you, okay, now this is an add instruction, but this add instruction you are going to add one register and one memory. Okay, so you fetch the memory from here and you go to this register and get the data. So now all these things could not be done by hardware itself. Okay, so what you have here is something called as a micro programmed control memory. I'm not sure if you have learned this earlier. But what you have is micro programmed control. So here you have another program kind of thing. Okay, so you have like a small program to do the control of your processor itself. Okay, so this program is going to tell you, if this is this add instruction, then you're going to activate these things. So whichever is one, right, you're going to activate these signals. If this is that instruction, then you have to do this. So it's more like a lookup table. Okay, so it's a very big lookup table that you have here. It's called as a microprogrammed control memory. The alternative you have in your RISC processor is a hardwired control. Okay, because the number of instruction is less, you don't need like a huge lookup table. You can just finish everything in like a small hardware. Okay, so it's called as a hardwired control unit. It's nothing but you just assemble D flip flops, and then you just say if this is the combination, you just enable these by your D flip flops. Okay, you're just going to pass the control through the D flip flops here. Okay, microcontrol program is even it's like it has to have one more interpreter inside this. Okay, it's much more complex here. Any questions on this, guys? Okay, so here's like a quick difference between CISC and RISC architecture. Okay, so if you take the instruction set size and instruction, so the CISC or complex instruction set computer, right, it has a large set of instructions. Okay, why? Because you have so many variants. With compared to RISC has only a small subset of instructions only. Okay, and addressing modes, you have like large addressing modes and number of addressing mode, because addressing mode could be different, right? So you can have register based, register memory, so many combinations are there, but here it's very small. Okay, similarly number of general purpose registers, you generally tend to have very small number of GPRs here in CISC. If you have learned x86 in your microprogram or micro controller class, you will have only like few registers, like base register, stack pointer, and few other registers. That's all. So unlike your RISC, where you have like 32 registers, 64 registers, it goes up to like 192 registers. Okay, it's like register based, because most of the instruction, 99% of the instructions are register based here in RISC. And CPA, if you take about the CPA is going to be large, and it's going to vary. Okay, so some instructions will be smaller, so because it will operate in registers, but some may have to wait for the memory. Okay, so then those instructions will take a longer clocks to complete. And then you have in RISC you have smaller CPA. And then CPU control, so we saw it's controlled micro program control in your uh, uh, CISC, compared to your hardwired control in your RISC. Okay. Okay, let's quickly have a quiz. So yeah, Chaitra, point to someone. Come on, make it fast, Chaitra. Sweden, are you there? Hey, yeah, can you point to someone? Shreya, Shreya R. Shreya, are you there? Hey, Shreya. Yeah, let's try to answer the first question here. Which of the following are the properties of RISC? Oh, sorry, CISC. Is that correct? CISC has lower CPI. Let's go back. Want to take a look at it once? You ready, Shreya? Now? Correct. Only first two. Correct. Yeah. Okay. So CISC does not have lower CPI. Okay. All right. So now let's point to someone. Shreya, yeah. Can you point to someone? Sindhu. Sindhu R. Sindhu, are you there? Sindhu R. Are you there? Come on, guys. Let's make it fast. Sindhu. Okay, someone else now. Rahul, are you there? Priya. Okay, Priya. Priya. Priya, are you there? Priya, please unmute. Hey, Rahul. Rahul Kumar Singh. Hey, yeah, you want to try the second question here? Attempt. Can you be a bit louder? Why are you not sure? So Shreya mentioned this thing. Okay, which of the following are the properties of CISC? And she said A and B are true, which means CISC has large set of instructions with variable format, and then large number of addressing modes. Okay, and it does not have lower CPI, and it does not have hardwired control. Okay, now coming to RISC, why don't you attempt this? Does RISC has small instructions with variable format? Do you think this is correct? A is correct. Okay, yeah, it's partly only correct. Okay, small set of instructions is correct, but variable formats is not correct. Okay, so there is no variable format in RISC. RISC has very simple formats. Okay, it's fixed formats only. And then large number of addressing modes. Does it have large number of addressing modes? Come on, Rahul. Small number of addressing modes. Okay, then it doesn't apply. Then third one, C, lower CPI. Does RISC have lower CPI? You're confused. Okay. So yeah, RISC has lower CPI because it has simple instructions. It takes only fewer clock cycles to finish one instruction. Okay. So it has lower CPI. And is it hardwired controlled? And that is also yes. Okay. It is hardwired control. RISC architectures are generally hardwired controlled. Okay. So the answer to this is C and D. Okay. Clear. Guys, you have to be really clear on what is CISC and what is RISC. Okay. All right. We have another 10-15 minutes. We'll just move on. We'll quickly finish this. CISC scalar processors. So we will start with CISC scalar processor. So one example is VAX 8600. So this is one of the first CISC processors. Okay, so it was invented in 1985 by Digital Equipment Corporation. So this VAX 8600. So VAX has been there even before that. Okay, so it has roughly 300 instructions and 20 different addressing modes. Okay, so it is CISC processor with microprogrammed control, like as we have seen. So CISC with microprogrammed control. It has both integer and floating point unit. Okay, so there's also a prefetch unit. So what does prefetch unit do? So prefetch unit is something uh, it's a, I mean, what to say, it fetches not only the next instruction, but then it keeps in memory like more than the next instruction. Like it will save like next 5 instructions or 10 instructions it will bring from memory, because memory control is very I mean, memory access is very slow. So what you will do is, rather than, so every memory access will take several cycles. Okay, it will take roughly like 100 cycles, or probably less than that, 20-30 cycles to fetch from memory. uh, so you don't have to wait 20 cycles every time you want to fetch instruction, right? So what you will do is, as you fetch the next instruction, you will also fetch the next 10 instructions and put it in your cache memory. Okay, so that you will save some time here. And then you have branch handling capability. So branch handling is another important topic in pipelining. See, problem is, when you encounter a branch, you have to take one way or the other. Okay, so you don't know which one to fetch next, correct? So if there is an if condition, if a is greater than b, x equal to 0. If a is lesser than b, then you will have, or like else, you have x equals to 1. You don't know which one to fetch next, right? You have to put it what you have to speculate, you don't know. So all these things, there are some branch handling capabilities in pipeline that are in place, which we will see in further modules. But so it has this feature. And there is something called as a TLB. Okay, so it's called translation look aside buffer. This is specifically used for virtual memory. Okay, when you have virtual memory, probably you would have learned that in your operating systems, right? So virtual memory is like making your processor think you have like more memory, like as big as your hard disk, right? Your processor will think, oh, I have like 1 terabyte of memory, but it's not 1 terabyte, correct? Your RAM is only like probably 4 GB or so, but your processor will think, oh, I have 1 terabyte. So how is it possible? You're going to do some kind of like page replacement and things like that, right? So that page translation, there's a page table that will do the translation of address, and this TLB acts as a cache for that. Okay, so that is going to act like a cache memory for your page tables. So that's your TLB. And typically this VAX architecture has 2 to 20 CPI, okay, clocks per instruction. There are a couple of more CISC processors that we'll see. So we have Intel. So Intel started out in 1970s, early 1970s, right? So started with the 4-bit 4004 ALU. Then it became 8008, 8080, 8085. All these are 8-bit processors. Then you have 8086, 8088, 186, 286. All these are 16-bit ALUs. And then you have your 8386, 486, and Pentium. These are all like 32-bit processors. And currently all your Core i5, i3, i7, all these things are your 64-bit architecture. So currently that's where we are at now. We also have Motorola. So Motorola also started out very well. So they had their 4-bit architecture in 1974, MC6800, and then you have 68000 in it's 8-bit architecture. Then 68020, 68030, 68040 are all 32-bit architectures. And then you also have national semiconductors have Motorola based processor, that's NS32532. So that's also a 32-bit architecture. So these are the different CISC processors, and they have been in the market. Okay, especially if you know, I mean, Intel is very popular, and even today Intel is what dominates your desktop and laptop market, right? PC, desktops, all these things are mostly Intel or probably AMD, right? So Intel or AMD. So it's only like x86 or CISC based architectures. So just look at Motorola MC68040. So it has more than 1.2 million transistors. So it's a big processor. It has 100 plus instructions and 18 addressing modes and 16 GPRs. Okay, so you have a split cache. So you have instruction cache and a data cache. So exclusively to store either instruction or data. So one of these. Okay, so you'll not mix it up. Then you have separate memory management unit, okay, to manage the memories, and then you have address translation cache. So this is same as your TLB that we saw in the earlier slide. Okay, so there's a cache to do the page translation. And then integer unit, it has pipeline with 6 stages and floating point with 3 stages. And data format, you have 80 to 8 to 80 bits with IEEE floating point standard. Okay. And you also have snooping logic. So we will see all this snooping logic, everything in, as part of memory management. So you have that support also in this. Next, we'll see RISC processors. So in RISC processors, you have Sun, Intel i860, and then Motorola M8800. Okay, and you also have AMD 29000, right? So these are the different processors. And one example given in your textbook is your Cypress CY 7C601 Spark processor. It's a very simple process. It has the same things what we saw earlier, right? The architecture is quite similar. Okay, so we will not delve deep into this block diagram. So in the Cypress CY 7C602, so this has additional floating point unit. Okay, so it has a floating point separate unit for floating point. So that's a specialty here. So Sun Spark, so this is a Spark architecture. So Spark stands for Scalable Processor Architecture. It has 69 instructions, out of which 14 are floating point instructions. I have 32-bit IU registers. Okay. Now the speciality of your Spark is that these 32 IU registers, right? So in that 8 are global, or they are shared with all. Okay, so these are the global registers, like 8 global registers are there. All the procedures, everybody can access this. But you also have 24 windowed registers. These 24 windows registers are overlapped. It's something like this figure here, right? So 8 here, 8 here, and 8 here. So they are divided into 3 groups of 8. So one is ins, one is outs, and the other is locals. Okay, so the locals are nothing but these are the ones that are available in for execution for the procedure. This is the local, these are the places where your local variables are stored. Okay, now in addition to that, there is something called as ins and something called as out. So this is my current procedure. Okay, so this is my function, a subroutine or a procedure that is running right now. Now in my procedure, I will have local variables and I will store the registers here, right? In this the local variables in these registers. Now the ins of this register, it's going to be shared with the outs of the previous procedure. Okay, so whichever procedure has called me, okay, so now that guy's output is going to be my input. So that is how you're sharing this here. And similarly, my output, I will share it with the procedure that I am calling. Okay, so that will be my out will be my my call my callee, right? So yeah, my callee procedure will have its ins as my outs. So you'll have this overlapped registers here. Okay, so here you're just showing 3 overlaps, but here if you have like 8 overlaps, this is how it is going to look like. Okay, so this is how your entire 8 overlaps are going to look like. So these are the overlap registers. Okay, but the concept is all the same. Any questions on this, guys? So just quickly go over. So this current window pointer in PSR. So the window pointer, so this it points to which window you are currently in. There's a three window, right? Like current window, previous, and next window. And window invalid mask will tell you which windows are all invalid. And then as we saw overlap registers with active windows, and we have floating point units here as well. We'll quickly go over Intel i860. So here, thing is, so you have your it's a RISC based architecture. You have floating point registers here, and you have two floating point units. So one is a multiply unit, and another is adder unit. They can independently work, or they can independently work, which means either one can work at a time, or both can also work during the time, right? So this is how your Intel processor looks like. Okay. So that's about that. So coming to the end of it, so we have RISC versus CISC. So RISC will outperform CISC if program length does not increase dramatically. Okay. So to compare, so this is your CISC processor. So if the code size, it'll be small, but the code is complicated. Okay. This is how your RISC program will look like. So this is how the program will look like. The program is going to look like this. But here in RISC, it's going to be narrow, which means the instructions are simpler, but the code size is going to be larger. Okay. Now, off late, the boundary has become very much blurred. We don't know like what is RISC, what is this, because if you take Intel for example, which started out as like a core CISC processor, they have incorporated lots of features from RISC. So they have made like a lot of wrappers around their CISC processors, and they have made sure that it becomes RISC like, because it's easier to pipeline a RISC processor than a CISC. So in order to do, I told you RISC, I mean, Intel also has superscalar, right? So in order to have superscalar kind of features, it's easier to do it in a RISC. So what Intel did was they actually have some kind of an like a wrapper, so that makes it a little more RISC like. And similarly, if you take ARM for example, ARM will pass out as a RISC processor any day, but it's not strictly RISC, because it actually incorporates a lot of variations in their registers, variable length registers, and so many things. So they have also incorporated a lot of CISC features into ARM now. So currently, these are the two big giants in the processor technology, and both of them have adapted the others' philosophy into their design, right? So currently, there is no clear border as to say, okay, this is purely RISC and this is purely CISC. So the answer always is it depends. Okay, so it really depends on what application you have and how you proceed. Okay, so that's your RISC versus CISC. Now to conclude, let's have like a small quiz. Say true or false. Okay, so let's pick somebody. Yeah, Shubham, can you pick someone? No. Yeah, say true or false. This answer this question, right? For a given program, the number of instructions for a RISC machine is typically more than that of a CISC machine. Why is it false? Ah, correct. Okay. So the yeah, correct. You're right. So the statement is true. Thanks. Why? Because see, RISC processor means reduced instruction set computer. Okay. It says reduced instruction set. The instruction set is small. But if you take a given program, you have to do the entire program in only the given set here. Okay, you let us say you have only 10 instructions. That's a very reduced set, right? I have only reduced set of 10 instructions. Now if I have to do matrix multiplication, with this 10 instructions I have to do my entire matrix multiplication. Okay, so which makes my program actually larger. Okay, the number of instructions in my program will become more. With this 10 instructions I have to do all the other computation, right? So all these things, all the instructions should be within this 10. But in CISC, that is not the case. You may have complex combinations of instructions. So your number of instructions will become smaller. Okay. But that doesn't mean like RISC will be slower and that will be faster. That doesn't mean that, because it's a lot more into that. So RISC can finish one instruction in like a very small time, but the CISC, even to do one instruction, it's a complex instruction, it will take a longer time. Okay. So, but when you give a RISC machine and a CISC machine, and you take one program, you can assure that RISC processor will have a longer program for sure. Okay, the number of instructions is going to be larger, or like the program is going to be bigger on a RISC machine. Okay, so with this we will stop for the day. Okay, there are no other questions, then we are done. Right? Thank you guys. You can give your attendance and leave. Thanks.